The first transmission crackled through the static at 3:47 hours, Moscow time. Control Tower 7 at Callsign Air Base had been monitoring routine patrol frequencies when an unidentified voice cut through the early morning silence. Any station, any station. This is Zephyr requesting immediate clearance to Syrian airspace. The duty officer, Senior Lieutenant Volkov, nearly dropped his coffee. That callsign hadn't been heard in over 3 years. According to every database in the Russian Air Force, it had never existed at all. The mystery deepened when radar operators detected a single aircraft approaching from the Mediterranean, flying a trajectory that should have been impossible for any known fighter jet. The signature was wrong, too clean, too precise, moving at speeds that defied conventional aircraft limitations. What troubled the analysts most wasn't what they were seeing, but what they weren't seeing. The aircraft appeared to be actively avoiding their most sophisticated tracking systems, slipping between radar sweeps like smoke through fingers. Colonel Dmitry Kozlov had been sleeping in his quarters when the alert sirens began wailing across the base. As commanding officer of the 787th Fighter Regiment, he'd overseen hundreds of combat missions over Syria, but nothing had prepared him for what awaited him in the command center. His officers stood frozen before their screens, staring at telemetry data that contradicted everything they understood about aerial warfare. The unidentified aircraft was now holding position 15 kilometers off the coast, neither advancing nor retreating, simply waiting. "Sir," Volkov's voice carried an edge of uncertainty, "the pilot is requesting direct communication with you. She's using authentication codes that our systems recognize, but—" He hesitated, glancing at his monitor. "According to our records, those codes belong to a pilot who died in a training accident 18 months ago." Kozlov felt ice settle in his stomach. He'd attended that funeral himself, had watched them lower the coffin of Captain Yelena Vasquez into frozen ground outside St. Petersburg. Yet here was someone claiming her identity, flying an aircraft that shouldn't exist, using clearance codes that had been permanently revoked after her supposed death. The colonel reached for his headset with trembling fingers, wondering if he was about to speak with a ghost. As dawn broke across the Syrian coast, painting the Mediterranean in shades of amber and gold, 3 Su-57 Felon fighters scrambled from Callsign runway. Their mission was simple: intercept and identify the phantom aircraft that had appeared from nowhere, carrying secrets that someone had tried very hard to bury. None of the pilots realized they were about to encounter a legend, one whose story would challenge everything they believed about courage, sacrifice, and the invisible wars fought in shadows above the clouds. The morning air tasted of salt and possibility, tinged with the metallic edge of approaching conflict. In the distance, thunder rolled across clear skies, though no storm clouds were visible anywhere on the horizon. Major Alexei Petrov led the interceptor formation, his Su-57 twin Saturn Al-41 F1 engines carving contrails through the crisp morning air. The stealth fighter's angular fuselage gleamed like polished obsidian, its serpentine curves designed to scatter radar waves into harmless echoes. Behind him, 2 wingmen maintained perfect formation, Captain Boris Semenov and Lieutenant Yuki Nakamura, the latter a recent exchange pilot from Japan's Air Self-Defense Force whose precision flying had earned grudging respect from even the most traditional Russian aviators. "Phantom lead, this is Tower 7, crackled the radio. "Target bearing 270, altitude 12,000 meters, maintaining steady course. Advise extreme caution, we're still not getting clean radar lock." Petrov's gloved fingers tightened on the stick. In 15 years of combat flying, he'd never encountered an aircraft that could evade the Su-57's sophisticated radar systems. The N-036 Bielka array could track targets at ranges exceeding 400 kilometers, yet their quarry remained frustratingly elusive, appearing as little more than a flickering ghost on his displays. "Phantom 2 copies," Semenov's voice carried tension beneath its professional calm. "Sir, my threat warning system keeps painting sporadic contacts, then losing them. Whatever we're chasing, it's actively jamming us." The three fighters climbed through wispy cirrus clouds, their engines leaving twin streams of vapor in the thin air. Below them, the Mediterranean stretched endlessly, its surface unmarked by the drama unfolding 6 miles above. Petrov found himself thinking of his daughter, safe in her Moscow apartment, probably just waking up for another day at university. She'd never know that her father was chasing shadows over foreign waters, pursuing a ghost that might hold the key to secrets someone had killed to protect. "Contact, contact!" Nakamura's excited voice broke through his reverie. "Visual on unknown aircraft, bearing 305, range 8 kilometers and closing." Petrov's breath caught as he spotted the target. The aircraft ahead defied easy classification, sleeker than any fighter he'd ever seen, with an almost organic fluidity to its design. Its wings blended seamlessly into the fuselage, creating an impression of a creature born to fly rather than built by human hands. No exhaust plume was visible, yet it maintained perfect formation speed with the interceptors, as if powered by some exotic propulsion system that left no thermal signature. "Unknown aircraft, unknown aircraft. You are being intercepted by Russian Air Force fighters," Petrov transmitted on standard international frequencies. "Identify yourself immediately and follow our aircraft to Kh-Mamim Air Base for inspection." The response came not through radio, but through a laser communication system that bypassed all conventional channels, speaking directly into Petrov's helmet display. The words that appeared there would haunt him for the rest of his life. "Hello, Alex. You always were too eager to shoot first and ask questions later." Only one person had ever called him Alex, with that particular mixture of affection and exasperation. Petrov's world tilted on its axis as impossible memories flooded back. A training exercise over the Caucasus Mountains, emergency landing procedures practiced until they became instinct, and a pilot whose skills had made even instructors step back in quiet amazement. He remembered her laugh, the way she'd insisted that flying wasn't about conquering the sky but dancing with it. Most of all, he remembered the funeral, the flag-draped coffin, and the official report that had classified her death as pilot error. "Zephyr," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the engine noise. "Yelena." The mysterious aircraft rolled inverted, exposing its belly to the interceptors in a gesture of trust that spoke louder than words. Stenciled along the fuselage in Cyrillic letters was a callsign that had been erased from all official records. Pe'erize Arakea Ghost. Below it, smaller letters spelled out a name that wasn't supposed to exist. Ka-pe-ta-in-ye. V-a-s-k-ye-s. The three Su-57 pilots flew in stunned silence, processing what they were seeing. According to every database in the Russian military, Captain Yelena Vasquez had died 18 months ago when her experimental aircraft had suffered catastrophic engine failure during a classified test flight. Her body had been recovered from the wreckage, identified through dental records, and buried with full military honors. Yet here she was, alive and flying an aircraft that belonged in science fiction novels rather than Syrian airspace. "This is impossible," Semenov breathed over the radio. "We all saw the wreckage, Alex. We attended her memorial service." Nakamura's voice carried the clinical detachment of someone processing data that defied logical explanation. "Phantom lead. Recommend we escort the unknown aircraft to base immediately. Whatever's happening here is far above our clearance level." But Petrov couldn't tear his eyes away from the impossible sight before him. The aircraft, whatever it was, moved with a grace that made his Su-57 feel clumsy by comparison. Every maneuver was executed with surgical precision, as if the pilot and machine had achieved perfect symbiosis. It was exactly how Yelena had always flown, treating her aircraft like a living extension of her own body rather than mere metal and electronics. As they descended toward Kh-Mamam Air Base, Petrov found himself remembering their last conversation. She'd been excited about a new assignment, something classified that she couldn't discuss even with fellow pilots. Her eyes had held a mixture of anticipation and apprehension, as if she knew she was stepping into something that would change everything. 3 weeks later, she was dead, or so they'd all believed. The morning sun climbed higher, burning away the last traces of coastal mist. 4 aircraft flew in formation through crystalline air, their shadows racing across the waves below like harbingers of revelations yet to come. Tower 7 buzzed with barely controlled chaos as the formation approached for landing. Word had spread quickly through the base that something extraordinary was happening. Ground crews gathered along the flight line, officers pressed against windows, and even off-duty personnel emerged from barracks to witness the impossible homecoming. Colonel Kozlov stood on the control tower's observation deck, his weathered hands gripping the railing as he watched 4 aircraft that should have been 3. The unknown aircraft touched down first, its landing as perfect as everything else about its flight. No reverse thrust was visible, no brake chutes deployed, yet it rolled to a stop with uncanny precision at the designated parking area. Ground crews approached cautiously, unsure whether they were dealing with friend or foe, living pilot or technological specter. Petrov's Su-57 landed seconds later, followed by his wingmen. As their engines spun down, he found himself walking toward the mysterious aircraft on unsteady legs, his mind still struggling to process what he'd witnessed. The canopy remained sealed, offering no glimpse of the pilot within. Whatever technology powered this machine, it was unlike anything in Russian inventory, or any inventory he knew of. Stand clear. Nobody approaches without authorization. Security forces surrounded the aircraft, their weapons trained on the silent machine. Captain Volkov's voice echoed across the tarmac through his bullhorn, but his orders felt hollow against the enormity of what was unfolding. Colonel Kozlov descended from the tower, his face a mask of professional composure hiding inner turmoil. He'd commanded this base for 4 years, overseen countless operations against Syrian rebels and ISIS remnants, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. As he approached the security perimeter, the mysterious aircraft's canopy began to open with a hydraulic whisper that seemed impossibly quiet in the desert air. The pilot who emerged moved with fluid grace, removing her helmet to reveal features that belonged to a dead woman. Yelena Vasquez looked exactly as she had 18 months ago, perhaps a bit leaner, with new lines around her eyes that spoke of stress and sleepless nights, but unmistakably alive. Her dark hair caught the morning sunlight as she stepped down from her aircraft, her movements carrying the confident bearing of someone accustomed to defying impossible odds. "Colonel," she said simply, offering a crisp salute to Kozlov. "Captain Vasquez reporting for debriefing. I apologize for the unscheduled arrival, but circumstances have become complicated." The silence that followed stretched like a held breath. Then Petrov pushed through the security cordon, his face a mixture of joy and confusion. "Yelena, we thought you were dead. Your funeral, we all," his voice broke, unable to process the emotional whiplash of mourning someone who stood before him very much alive. She smiled then, the same gentle expression that had made her beloved among her squadron mates. "Death, Alex, is sometimes the only way to disappear completely, and I needed to disappear." Her gaze shifted to include the growing crowd of spectators. "Unfortunately, staying hidden is no longer an option. Events are moving too quickly, and too many people are going to die if I don't surface." Security forces continued pointing their weapons at her, but uncertainty flickered in their eyes. This woman wore the uniform of a Russian Air Force captain, complete with proper insignia and identification tags. Her every gesture spoke of military training and discipline. Yet she piloted an aircraft that shouldn't exist and claimed an identity that belonged to a corpse buried in St. Petersburg soil. Colonel Kozlov stepped forward, his voice carefully controlled. "Captain, you will accompany me to interrogation immediately. Your aircraft will be secured pending technical evaluation. He paused, studying her face for any sign of deception. And you will explain how a dead woman came to be flying unknown aircraft in Syrian airspace. Yelena nodded, her expression growing somber. Yes, sir, but I should warn you, the story I have to tell will challenge everything you believe about this war, and before it's finished, you may wish I had stayed dead. As they walked toward the command building, her mysterious aircraft sat gleaming in the desert sun, its secrets locked behind curved titanium and technologies that belonged to a future that had somehow arrived early. The morning wind carried the scent of aviation fuel and possibility, mixed with the metallic taste of approaching storm clouds that gathered on more than just the meteorological horizon. The interrogation room felt smaller than usual with Yelena Vasquez sitting across from Colonel Kozlov. She'd accepted coffee but hadn't touched it, her attention focused entirely on the man who would decide whether she was treated as a returning hero or a potential threat to state security. Behind one-way glass, intelligence officers from both military and civilian agencies watched with the intensity of predators studying unfamiliar prey. Let's start with the basics, Kozlov said, his voice professionally neutral. According to our records, Captain Yelena Vasquez died 18 months ago in a training accident. Her aircraft suffered catastrophic engine failure over the Caucasus Mountains. Body recovered, identified, buried with full honors. He leaned forward. Yet here you are, very much alive and flying an aircraft that doesn't appear in any technical manual. Explain this discrepancy. Yelena's fingers drummed once against the metal table before falling still, a gesture Kozlov remembered from their brief interactions during her original posting. She'd always been a careful pilot, methodical in her planning but decisive in execution. Those qualities had made her valuable. They'd also, apparently, made her dangerous to someone. The accident was staged, she said simply. My death was necessary to protect an operation that couldn't be compromised. The body you buried belonged to Lieutenant Mila Volkov, a volunteer who died in a separate incident 3 days earlier. She'd requested that her death serve a greater purpose. We honored that request. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Kozlov felt his carefully maintained composure crack slightly. You're telling me that Russian military intelligence faked the death of one of our most promising pilots, that we buried the wrong person while you disappeared into some black program? Not exactly. Yelena's smile held no humor. I wasn't working for Russian intelligence when I disappeared, Colonel. I was working against it. The admission sparked immediate activity behind the one-way glass. Kozlov could hear urgent whispers, the scratch of pens on paper, the soft beep of encrypted communication devices. He forced himself to remain calm, to treat this like any other interrogation despite the extraordinary circumstances. Elaborate, he said. Yelena reached into her flight suit's pocket, moving slowly to avoid triggering any nervous reactions from watching security personnel. She withdrew a data storage device no larger than a coin, its surface etched with symbols that looked more like art than technology. 18 months ago, I discovered that certain elements within our military hierarchy were selling advanced aircraft technology to hostile nations. Not standard equipment, prototype systems that could shift the balance of power in any conflict. She slid the device across the table. This contains evidence of those transactions, along with documentation of the consequences. 3 separate nations have used Russian technology to develop stealth fighters that our own pilots can't detect or engage effectively. The aircraft I flew here today was built from stolen plans, plans that were supposed to remain classified for another decade. Kozlov stared at the device as if it were a live grenade. And you obtained this evidence how? By infiltrating the network responsible for the leaks. It required faking my death and spending 18 months operating deep undercover in territories controlled by groups that would execute me without hesitation if they discovered my true identity. Her voice carried the weight of someone who'd seen things that would haunt her dreams forever. I've been to places that don't appear on any map, Colonel. I've seen weapons that make nuclear arsenals look primitive. And I've learned that this war, all of our wars, are being orchestrated by people who profit from perpetual conflict. The coffee in Kozlov's cup had grown cold, but he didn't notice. His world was reshaping itself around revelations that threatened everything he'd believed about duty, honor, and the cause he'd served for 30 years. If Yelena was telling the truth, then every mission he'd flown, every order he'd followed, every life lost under his command had been part of someone else's grand deception. "Why surface now?" he asked. "Why risk exposure after maintaining deep cover for so long?" Yelena's expression darkened. "Because they're planning something that will make Syria look like a minor skirmish, and it starts tomorrow." The afternoon heat shimmered across KH-MAM's runways as emergency briefings commenced in the base's secure conference room. Senior officers from multiple commands had arrived within hours of Yelena's landing, their faces bearing the grim expressions of people whose comfortable certainties had been violently disrupted. Maps covered every available wall space, displaying theater-wide intelligence that painted an increasingly disturbing picture of regional instability. General Viktor Marchenko commanded the room's attention simply by existing within it. The architect of Russian air superiority over Syria, he'd earned his stars through decades of combat operations that had reshaped the Middle Eastern strategic landscape. His presence at KH-MAM meant that whatever Yelena had revealed was being taken seriously at the highest levels of command. "Captain Vasquez," Marchenko's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Your claims have been partially corroborated through independent intelligence sources. Satellite imagery confirms unusual military buildups in 3 separate theaters. Electronic intelligence suggests coordinated communications between hostile elements that shouldn't have access to our encryption protocols." He gestured toward the maps. "Show us what we're facing." Yelena moved to the front of the room with practiced confidence, her posture radiating the quiet competence that had made her legendary among test pilots. "Gentlemen, what you're seeing is the opening phase of a carefully orchestrated campaign designed to collapse regional stability while maximizing arms sales to all participating factions. The groups involved have been playing all sides against each other for years, selling weapons to governments and rebels alike." She activated a holographic display that materialized above the conference table, showing 3-dimensional battlespace geometry that made traditional maps obsolete. "Tomorrow at dawn, Syrian opposition forces will launch coordinated strikes against government positions using aircraft that our air defense systems cannot effectively engage. These fighters were built using stolen Russian technology, specifically designs that were supposed to remain classified until 2035. The hologram shifted, revealing aircraft specifications that made several officers lean forward in their chairs. The displayed fighters combined the best features of American F-22 Raptors with advanced Russian stealth technology, creating hybrid aircraft that could dominate any conventional air force. More troubling were the manufacturing stamps visible on critical components. They bore the seals of factories that officially didn't exist. Colonel Kozlov studied the technical readouts with growing unease. "These specifications, they're based on Project Prometheus." He looked up sharply. "Captain, that program was terminated after your supposed death. How could foreign agents have accessed those designs?" "Because Project Prometheus was never terminated, sir. It was privatized." Yelena's words fell like physical blows. "The technology was sold to a consortium of defense contractors who have been developing it independently. They've created a shadow military-industrial complex that operates beyond any national authority, selling advanced weapons to anyone willing to pay their prices." General Marchenko's face had grown ashen. Project Prometheus represented years of development and billions of rubles in classified research. If that technology had indeed been compromised, the implications extended far beyond Syrian airspace. Every Russian military operation worldwide could be at risk from enemies equipped with their own most advanced systems. The aircraft you flew here, Marchenko said slowly, it's built from Prometheus technology. A modified version, yes. I've spent the last 18 months infiltrating their production facilities and learning their capabilities. Yelena paused, her expression growing haunted. Sir, they're not just selling fighters. They've weaponized technologies that haven't even been theoretical until recently. Directed energy weapons, gravitational manipulation systems, artificial intelligence that can outfly any human pilot, all being sold to the highest bidders. The silence that followed was deafening. These were career military officers, men who dedicated their lives to understanding the tools of warfare. The technologies Yelena described belonged in science fiction, not combat theaters. Yet the evidence floating above their conference table suggested that science fiction had become operational reality while they'd been fighting yesterday's wars with yesterday's weapons. Recommendations? Marchenko asked, his voice carefully controlled. Yelena's smile held the cold edge of someone who'd seen the future and found it wanting. We stopped them, sir, tonight. As evening shadows lengthened across the Syrian desert, Kh-Mamam airbase transformed into a fortress preparing for siege. Aircraft were repositioned to hardened shelters, surface-to-air missile batteries swiveled toward potential threat vectors, and maintenance crews worked with desperate efficiency to prepare every available fighter for immediate launch. The base hummed with the tense energy of people who knew that dawn might bring challenges their conventional training hadn't prepared them to face. In the pilot's briefing room, 12 of Russia's most experienced combat aviators studied mission profiles that read like fever dreams. Their target was a manufacturing complex hidden beneath the Syrian desert, a facility that officially didn't exist but somehow produced weapons that threatened to make conventional air forces obsolete. Satellite imagery showed structures that defied easy explanation, geometric patterns that suggested purpose without revealing function, energy signatures that indicated massive industrial operations despite the apparent emptiness of the surrounding terrain. Major Petrov stood before the assembled pilots, his face reflecting the weight of commanding a mission that could determine the future of aerial warfare. Ladies and gentlemen, you've all reviewed the intelligence package. What we're facing tonight challenges everything we know about enemy capabilities. Our target possesses aircraft and defensive systems that outperform anything in our current inventory. Captain Semenov raised his hand. Sir, if their technology is so advanced, how do we expect to survive contact with their forces? The question hung in the air like an accusation. These were pilots who'd flown combat missions against ISIS, Syrian rebels, and Turkish forces, all dangerous opponents, but enemies whose capabilities fell within understood parameters. The prospect of engaging aircraft that could outfly, outgun, and outmaneuver their own fighters touched primal fears that no amount of training could completely suppress. Yelena stepped forward, her presence commanding immediate attention. Because I know their weaknesses. Every technological system, no matter how advanced, has vulnerabilities that can be exploited by pilots skilled enough to recognize them. The aircraft you'll face tonight are impressive, but they're operated by mercenaries who learn to fly them in simulators rather than combat veterans who understand the difference between theoretical capability and battlefield reality. She activated another holographic display, this one showing tactical formations that emphasized coordinated attacks over individual heroics. Their stealth technology is effective against radar, but vulnerable to visual identification at close range. Their artificial intelligence systems excel at predicting conventional fighter tactics, but struggle with asymmetric approaches that violate standard doctrine. Most importantly, they've never faced pilots willing to die for something greater than money. Lieutenant Nakamura leaned forward, studying the tactical diagrams with professional intensity. Captain, these formation patterns, they're unlike anything in our standard playbook. Some of these maneuvers would be considered reckless under normal circumstances. Normal circumstances ended the moment advanced Russian technology started appearing in enemy hands, Yelena replied. Tonight, we're not flying by the book. We're writing a new chapter that prioritizes mission success over individual survival. Every one of you volunteered for this mission knowing that survival wasn't guaranteed. What matters is ensuring that tomorrow's dawn reveals a world where technology serves legitimate military forces rather than shadow organizations profiting from perpetual conflict. General Marchenko's voice crackled through the briefing room's communication system. All pilots, this is Dragon Base. Current intelligence suggests the enemy is accelerating their timeline. Satellite reconnaissance indicates massive aircraft movements within the target complex. Whatever they're planning, it's happening tonight rather than tomorrow. The implications settled over the assembled pilots like a physical weight. Instead of having hours to prepare for a dawn assault, they were facing an immediate threat that could launch within minutes. Emergency protocols activated throughout the base as ground crews raced to complete final preparations on aircraft that might represent humanity's last best hope against a technological revolution that had slipped beyond any single nation's control. Yelena's voice cut through the rising tension. Gentlemen, the future is being decided tonight. Let's make sure it's a future worth fighting for. Outside, the first stars appeared in the Syrian sky, their ancient light bearing silent witness to another moment when human courage would be measured against impossible odds. The runway stretched ahead like a river of possibility and terror, its surface still radiating heat from the day's merciless sun. 12 Su-57 Felon fighters sat poised for immediate launch, their angular forms appearing almost organic in the dancing shadows cast by perimeter lighting. Each aircraft represented the pinnacle of Russian aerospace engineering, twin-engine stealth fighters capable of speeds exceeding Mach 2, armed with hypersonic missiles, and equipped with radar systems that could track targets beyond visual range. Yet tonight, facing an enemy equipped with technology that had leapfrogged conventional development by decades, these magnificent machines felt almost primitive. Yelena walked the flight line with the measured pace of someone performing a ritual that had defined her entire adult life. Her hands moved automatically through pre-flight checks that had become as natural as breathing, testing control surfaces, verifying weapons loadouts, confirming that every system functioned within acceptable parameters. The familiar routine provided an anchor of normalcy in circumstances that defied rational explanation. Her aircraft waited at the line's head, its exotic design making the conventional fighters appear quaint by comparison. The machine that had carried her back from 18 months of shadow operations bore scars that told stories she could never share. Blast damage from weapons that weren't supposed to exist, where patterns that suggested speeds no human should have survived, modifications that transformed Russian engineering into something approaching science fiction. Ghost, Major Petrov's voice carried across the tarmac as he approached for final coordination. Are you certain this target intelligence is current? Satellite images show the complex is larger than our initial estimates. We could be flying into a situation that requires more firepower than 12 fighters can provide. Yelena's smile held the confidence of someone who'd survived 18 months of impossible missions. Alex, I've been inside that facility. I know every defensive position, every aircraft deployment pattern, every weakness in their operational protocols. What we lack in numbers, we'll compensate for with precision and surprise. They're expecting conventional assault tactics. Instead, we're going to give them something they've never encountered. She gestured toward the tactical display mounted on her aircraft's wing, showing approach vectors that violated every standard doctrine. We're not attacking the facility, Alex. We're infiltrating it. Half our force will engage their defensive fighters while the rest of us penetrate the complex itself and destroy their manufacturing capability from within. It's surgical rather than overwhelming, exactly the kind of mission that conventional forces can't execute but elite pilots can accomplish. The evening air carried the scent of aviation fuel and desert dust, mixed with the ozone smell that preceded electrical storms. Weather reports indicated clear skies for the next 6 hours, but atmospheric pressure readings suggested that nature itself was holding its breath for what was about to unfold. Ground crews completed their final preparations with the focused intensity of people who understood that lives depended on their precision. Captain Semenov emerged from his fighter's cockpit after completing systems checks, his face showing the controlled tension that preceded combat operations. All aircraft report ready for immediate launch. Weapons systems are hot, defensive countermeasures are active, and communication protocols are established. Ghost, we're ready to follow your lead. The formation that prepared for takeoff represented more than military hardware. It embodied the accumulated skill of pilots who dedicated their lives to mastering the art of aerial combat. Each aviator brought unique strengths forged through years of training and real-world experience. Together, they formed a weapon system that transcended the sum of its individual components, a living expression of human determination to confront challenges that logic suggested were insurmountable. As turbine engines began their characteristic whine, building toward the screaming crescendo that preceded launch, Yelena felt the familiar transformation that occurred whenever she prepared to slip earthly bonds. The weight of ground-based concerns fell away, replaced by the crystalline clarity that came with three-dimensional thinking and split-second decision-making. Tonight, she would either help preserve the future of legitimate military forces, or die trying to prevent humanity's descent into technological servitude. Either way, she was finally going home. The 12-ship formation lifted into Syrian airspace at precisely 2100 hours, their engines carving luminous trails through air that seemed to vibrate with anticipation. Below them, the desert stretched endlessly in all directions, an ocean of sand and stone that had witnessed countless conflicts throughout human history. Tonight, it would bear witness to another chapter in the eternal struggle between those who sought to control advanced technology and those who fought to ensure it served humanity's greater interests. Yelena's aircraft took point position, its exotic design making it appear almost supernatural as it sliced through the evening sky. Behind her, 11 Su-57 fighters maintained perfect formation, their pilots monitoring threat warning systems that painted increasingly ominous pictures of what awaited them at their destination. Long-range sensors detected energy signatures that shouldn't have existed, aircraft movement patterns that defied conventional explanation, and defensive systems that operated beyond any known technological parameters. Ghost Lead, this is Phantom 2, Semenov's voice crackled through encrypted communications. My threat warning receivers are painting contacts that appear and disappear faster than our systems can track. Whatever's ahead of us, it's actively scanning our formation. Confirmed, Phantom 2. We're entering their detection perimeter. Yelena's response carried the calm professionalism of someone who'd faced similar challenges during her 18 months of deep cover operations. Maintain formation integrity and prepare for defensive maneuvers. Their initial probes are designed to gather intelligence about our capabilities. Don't give them more information than necessary. The flight progressed through increasingly hostile electromagnetic spectrum as they approached the target coordinates. What had appeared on satellite imagery as empty desert revealed itself to be an elaborate deception. Massive structures lay hidden beneath carefully constructed camouflage, their true purpose concealed by holographic projections that made barren sand appear to continue unbroken to the horizon. Only the most sophisticated sensors could penetrate the illusion, revealing a manufacturing complex that sprawled across dozens of square kilometers. Lieutenant Nakamura's voice carried barely controlled excitement. Ghost Lead, I'm reading energy signatures that suggest aircraft launching from concealed positions. Multiple contacts, bearing various vectors, altitude climbing rapidly. They're scrambling interceptors. The moment every pilot had been anticipating arrived with shocking suddenness. Enemy aircraft began appearing on their displays, not the gradual buildup typical of conventional air battles, but instantaneous contacts that materialized as if emerging from another dimension. These weren't normal fighters. They moved with fluid grace that suggested propulsion systems beyond current understanding, achieving accelerations that would have killed human pilots but apparently presented no challenges to whoever or whatever controlled them. All units, this is Ghost Lead. Execute Omega Protocol immediately. Remember, we're not here to dogfight their interceptors. Our mission is penetrating the manufacturing complex and destroying their production capability. Phantoms 1 through 4, engage hostile aircraft and provide cover. Phantoms 5 through 11, follow me to target penetration. Time to find out if 18 months of preparation was worth the investment. The formation split with practiced precision, half the fighters climbing to engage the mysterious interceptors, while the remainder dove toward the desert floor. What followed would either be remembered as the night conventional air forces proved they could adapt to technological challenges that exceeded their specifications, or as the moment humanity discovered that courage alone wasn't sufficient to overcome enemies equipped with science that belonged to future centuries. As the first missile launches painted brief stars across the darkening sky, Yelena felt the familiar clarity that came with mortal combat. Everything she'd learned, everything she'd sacrificed, everything she'd become during her hidden war was about to be tested against an enemy that represented the ultimate fusion of advanced technology and human ambition. The dance of death began with the beauty and terror that had characterized aerial combat since humans first learned to fly. The first exchange of fire illuminated the desert night like a premature sunrise, missile trails carving geometric patterns across a canvas of stars and darkness. Enemy interceptors moved with unnatural fluidity, their maneuvers defying conventional understanding of aerodynamic limitations. They accelerated without visible thrust, turned at angles that should have created catastrophic structural failure, and achieved speeds that made even the Su-57 impressive performance seem pedestrian. Major Petrov led the engagement element in a climbing spiral that brought his formation into direct contact with 4 enemy aircraft. His first impression was of fighting ghosts. The opposing fighters seemed to anticipate his moves before he made them, rolling away from missile locks with mechanical precision that suggested artificial intelligence rather than human pilots. His threat warning system screamed constant alerts as exotic weapons systems painted his aircraft with targeting beams that operated beyond familiar electromagnetic spectra. Phantom 1, break left. Break left now. Semenov's urgent warning came seconds before a beam of coherent energy passed through the space Petrov's fighter had occupied milliseconds earlier. The weapon left no visible trace of its passage, but the air itself seemed to shimmer with residual energy that made his instruments fluctuate wildly. What the hell was that? Petrov's voice carried the strain of someone whose reality was being redefined in real time. My threat warning systems didn't even detect incoming fire. How do we fight enemies we can't see coming? Yelena's response cut through the tactical frequency with the authority of experience. Don't rely on your instruments, Alex. These aircraft are designed to defeat electronic warfare systems. Trust your eyes, trust your instincts, and remember that no technology can completely eliminate the human element from aerial combat. They're faster and more maneuverable, but they lack the creativity that comes from desperation. The engagement element found themselves locked in a 3-dimensional chess match against opponents who seemed to possess perfect information about their capabilities, while revealing nothing about their own limitations. Conventional missile systems proved largely ineffective against aircraft that could apparently violate basic laws of physics, forcing the Russian pilots to rely on short-range cannon fire and maneuvers that pushed their own aircraft beyond normal operational parameters. Meanwhile, Yelena led her penetration element toward the camouflaged manufacturing complex, their aircraft skimming the desert floor at altitudes that left no margin for error. The facility's defensive systems awakened as they approached, revealing weapon emplacements that had been invisible from satellite reconnaissance. Particle beam projectors emerged from concealed positions, their targeting systems tracking the approaching fighters with mechanical precision that suggested computer-controlled operation. Ghost Lead, I'm painting multiple surface-to-air threats, reported Captain Mikhailov, flying wing position in the formation. These aren't standard missile systems. They appear to be direct-energy weapons with instantaneous engagement capability. The desert floor erupted in brilliant flashes as the defensive grid activated, transforming empty sand into a maze of coherent energy beams that crisscrossed the night sky like deadly aurora. Yelena's formation dove between the defensive fire, their aircraft dancing through gaps between energy streams that could vaporize titanium in microseconds. The evasive maneuvers required split-second timing that pushed human reaction speeds to their absolute limits, each pilot becoming an extension of their machine in ways that transcended normal training. Penetration element, execute scatter pattern 7, Yelena commanded, her voice steady despite the chaos surrounding them. Independent approaches to separate entry points. Remember, once inside, we have exactly 12 minutes before their defensive systems adapt to our presence. The 6 fighters broke formation, each pilot selecting different approach vectors toward the manufacturing complex. What they found beneath the holographic camouflage defied comprehension, structures that seemed to grow from the Earth itself, their surfaces flowing like liquid metal while maintaining structural integrity that suggested materials science decades beyond current understanding. Massive bay doors opened in response to their approach, revealing aircraft production lines that operated without human supervision. Captain Volkov's voice carried awe tinged with terror. Ghost Lead, I'm seeing assembly processes that appear to be constructing fighters in real time. These aren't conventional manufacturing techniques. It looks like molecular assembly, building aircraft atom by atom. Inside the complex, automated systems worked with inhuman precision to create weapons that would shift the balance of global power. Robotic fabricators assembled airframes from materials that combined the strength of titanium with the weight of aluminum, while other machines installed propulsion systems that operated on principles beyond conventional understanding. Most disturbing were the pilot compartments. Each was equipped with neural interfaces that suggested the aircraft were designed to be operated by human minds that had been technologically augmented beyond normal limitations. Yelena's aircraft penetrated deepest into the facility, her familiarity with the layout allowing her to navigate through corridors that conventional fighters would have found impossible to traverse. She'd spent months studying these production lines during her undercover operation, learning how shadow organizations had weaponized technologies that legitimate governments couldn't have imagined. Tonight, she would ensure that knowledge served a purpose greater than mere intelligence gathering. All units, this is Ghost Lead. I'm in position at the primary fusion reactor. Beginning demolition sequence now. Her fingers moved across control surfaces that had been modified far beyond standard specifications, activating systems that would turn her own aircraft into a precisely calibrated explosive device. You have 8 minutes to clear the facility before reactor containment fails. The other pilots acknowledged with terse confirmations, their own aircraft carrying conventional explosives towards secondary targets throughout the complex. Each explosion would contribute to a cascade failure that would render the facility inoperable, but Yelena's sacrifice would provide the decisive blow that ensured nothing could be salvaged from the wreckage. Above the desert, the air battle continued with increasing desperation as conventional fighters struggled against enemies that seemed to exist beyond normal physical laws. Yet slowly, Through courage and tactical innovation that compensated for technological disadvantages, the Russian pilots began achieving small victories against opponents who had apparently never faced adversaries willing to die for their cause. The night sky burned with the light of technologies that humanity wasn't ready to possess, wielded by people who had forgotten that advanced weapons meant nothing without the wisdom to use them responsibly. Major Petrov's Su-57 rolled, inverted through a cloud of superheated plasma, his aircraft's heat-resistant coating the only thing preventing immediate vaporization. The enemy fighter that had fired the directed energy weapon overshot his position, moving too fast to correct for evasive maneuvers that violated conventional fighter doctrine. For a brief moment, the advanced aircraft became vulnerable to the kind of close-range cannon fire that had dominated aerial combat for decades. Phantom 1. Guns, guns, guns. Petrov's 30 cannon spat a stream of depleted uranium rounds that intersected the enemy fighter's flight path with brutal efficiency. The exotic aircraft's defenses proved inadequate against kinetic energy weapons, its advanced armor fragmenting under impacts that released energy through simple physics rather than complex technology. The enemy fighter disintegrated in a brilliant fireball that illuminated the entire battle space, proving that advanced technology could still be defeated by fundamental principles applied with sufficient skill and determination. The psychological impact of the kill rippled through both formations. The enemy aircraft began maneuvering more defensively, while the Russian pilots pressed their attacks with renewed confidence. "All units, this is Phantom 2, Semenov reported, his voice tight with concentration. "I've identified a pattern in their defensive systems. These aircraft have predictive AI that anticipates our moves based on standard doctrine, but they struggle with improvisation. Recommend switching to asymmetric attack patterns immediately." The engagement element began implementing tactics that had never appeared in any training manual, combining elements from different eras of aerial combat in ways that confused computer systems designed to counter conventional approaches. World War II barrel rolls merged with jet-age boom and zoom attacks, while modern missile tactics were abandoned in favor of knife-fight maneuvering that brought opponents within cannon range. Lieutenant Nakamura demonstrated the effectiveness of unconventional thinking by executing a maneuver that should have resulted in immediate destruction. Instead of evading an incoming energy beam, she flew directly toward it while performing a tactical roll that presented the smallest possible target profile. The beam passed harmlessly through space her aircraft had occupied milliseconds earlier, while her return fire caught the enemy fighter at a range where its defensive systems couldn't react effectively. Below them, the manufacturing complex began showing signs of the destruction taking place within its hidden chambers. Secondary explosions rippled through structures that had seemed invulnerable moments earlier, their exotic materials proving that advanced construction techniques meant nothing when subjected to properly placed demolition charges. The facility's defensive grid flickered as power systems failed, creating gaps in the energy barriers that had seemed impenetrable. "Ghost Lead, status report." General Marchenko's voice crackled through long-range communications from Callsign base. "Satellite imagery shows massive energy releases from the target area. Confirm mission status." Yelena's response came from deep within the facility, her transmission distorted by interference from exotic energy systems that were failing catastrophically around her. "Dragon Base, this is Ghost Lead. Mission objectives achieved. Facility will be completely destroyed in approximately 4 minutes. Recommend all aircraft clear to minimum safe distance immediately." Her aircraft had become wedged between massive reactor containment vessels, its exotic propulsion system overloading in a carefully controlled fashion that would create a chain reaction throughout the facility's power grid. She'd known from the beginning that this mission would be one way, but the knowledge brought peace rather than fear. 18 months of living in shadows had taught her that some prices were worth paying for the chance to prevent greater suffering. Ghost Lead, this is Phantom One. We can extract you. There's still time to reach minimum safe distance. Petrov's voice carried the desperation of someone watching a friend choose death over escape. Negative, Alex. The reaction has to be controlled from inside the facility, or the explosion won't be sufficient to destroy their manufacturing capability. Besides, her laugh carried the same gentle humor that had made her beloved among her squadron mates. Someone has to make sure these bastards don't rebuild elsewhere. The stars wheeled overhead as the final seconds counted down toward a conclusion that would reshape humanity's relationship with advanced technology and the shadow organizations that sought to control it. The explosion began as a whisper of light deep within the earth, a gentle glow that seemed almost peaceful in its initial manifestation. Then physics took control, and the contained fusion reaction that had powered the manufacturing complex transformed into an expanding sphere of energy that redefined the local environment at the molecular level. The desert floor lifted skyward in a perfect hemisphere of superheated matter, while electromagnetic pulses spread outward at light speed to disable electronic systems hundreds of kilometers away. Above the chaos, 11 Russian fighters climbed desperately toward safe altitude, their pilots fighting against atmospheric disturbances that threatened to tear their aircraft apart. The remaining enemy interceptors had already fled, their advanced technology apparently including enough wisdom to recognize when tactical withdrawal was the only viable option. What had begun as an air battle between conventional and exotic aircraft had become a race against an expanding wave of destruction that made all other considerations irrelevant. Major Petrov's aircraft shuddered as the shockwave reached his altitude, its structural integrity tested by forces that no engineer had anticipated during the Su-57 design phase. His instruments flickered between normal readings and complete failure as residual electromagnetic effects interfered with systems that had been hardened against conventional warfare, but never tested against the collapse of advanced fusion reactors. All units, this is Phantom One. Form up on my position and maintain maximum altitude until atmospheric disturbances subside. His voice carried the authority of someone who'd assumed command responsibilities in the aftermath of an event that would be studied by military historians for decades. Dragon Base, this is Phantom One. Ghost Lead is. He paused, unable to complete the sentence that would officially acknowledge Yelena's sacrifice. Dragon Base copies Phantom One. Ghost Lead's final transmission was received and recorded. Mission assessment, complete success. All objectives achieved. General Marchenko's response carried professional composure that couldn't quite mask the emotional weight of losing one of Russia's most exceptional pilots. Return to base when conditions permit. Well done, all of you. The flight home passed in contemplative silence as 11 survivors processed events that had challenged their understanding of warfare, technology, and the price of preserving freedom in an increasingly complex world. Below them, a crater marked the location where advanced manufacturing capability had been erased from existence, ensuring that shadow organizations would need to rebuild their technological advantages from scratch. At Callsign Air Base, ground crews prepared for the returning fighters with a mixture of relief and somber recognition. Word of the mission's success had spread throughout the installation, but everyone understood that victory had come at a cost that would be felt far beyond the immediate tactical situation. Yelena Vasquez had become a legend twice, first by disappearing into deep cover operations that required her to fake her own death, then by sacrificing herself to prevent technologies from being used against the people she'd sworn to protect. As the first aircraft touched down on the runway, their engines whining in harmony with desert winds that carried the scent of distant fires, Colonel Kozlov stood on the control tower's observation deck and wondered whether they'd prevented a catastrophe or merely delayed it. Advanced technology would continue advancing. Shadow organizations would continue seeking ways to profit from conflict, and pilots would continue placing themselves between chaos and civilization. But tonight, 11 brave aviators had proven that human courage remained relevant in an age of artificial intelligence and directed energy weapons. Sometimes, that was enough to preserve hope for better tomorrows. The stars overhead seemed brighter than usual, as if the universe itself was acknowledging a moment when ordinary people had accomplished extraordinary things through determination that transcended technological limitations. Dawn broke across Syria with unusual clarity, the aftermath of the previous night's electromagnetic disturbances having cleared atmospheric pollutants that normally obscured the horizon. Colonel Kozlov stood in his office reviewing after action, reports that read like science fiction despite their official classification and bureaucratic formatting. Satellite imagery showed a perfectly circular crater where the manufacturing complex had existed, its edges so precisely defined that they appeared to have been cut with geometric instruments rather than created by explosive forces. The intelligence implications were staggering. Analysis of debris recovered from the crater's periphery revealed materials that wouldn't be commercially available for decades, manufacturing techniques that had leapfrogged normal technological development, and evidence of global networks that had been secretly developing advanced weapons systems, while legitimate governments struggled with conventional threats. "Sir," Major Petrov entered the office with the measured pace of someone who'd spent the night processing events that challenged fundamental assumptions about modern warfare. "The preliminary debriefing transcripts are ready for your review. Also, we've received priority communications from Moscow requesting detailed technical analysis of the enemy aircraft we engaged." Kozlov accepted the thick folder with hands that showed the slight tremor common to career military officers who'd survived more combat than human psychology was designed to process. "Major, in your professional assessment, how many similar facilities might exist worldwide?" The question hung between them like a physical presence. If shadow organizations had successfully hidden such an advanced manufacturing complex in Syrian desert, what other technological capabilities might be operating beyond the awareness of legitimate intelligence services? The implications suggested that conventional military forces might be fighting obsolete wars, while their real enemies developed weapons that belonged in the next century. "Based on the intercepts Captain Vasquez provided before her final mission, sir, we estimate at least 12 similar facilities across 6 continents. The organization she infiltrated operated on a scale that suggests significant backing from sources with essentially unlimited funding." Petrov's expression reflected the soberness of someone delivering news that would reshape strategic thinking at the highest levels. Through the office window, they could see maintenance crews working on the aircraft that had returned from the mission. Each fighter bore scars that told stories of encounters with weapons that shouldn't have existed, scorch marks from directed energy beams, metal fatigue from maneuvering beyond design specifications, and electronic systems that continued showing anomalous readings hours after the engagement had ended. "The men are calling her the ghost of K.H. Mamim," Petrov continued. "They're saying she died twice for Russia, once to disappear into deep cover, and again to prevent technology from being used against us. There's talk of recommending her for Hero of the Russian Federation, posthumously." Kozlov nodded slowly, recognizing that legends were often born from moments when ordinary people transcended their limitations to accomplish tasks that logic suggested were impossible. Yelena Vasquez had become something more than a pilot or intelligence operative. She'd become a symbol of human determination to ensure that advanced technology served legitimate purposes rather than shadow organizations that profited from perpetual conflict. "Major, I want detailed technical analysis of everything we learned last night. Every weapons system, every defensive capability, every piece of technology that exceeded our current understanding. If more facilities exist, We need to be prepared to engage them with conventional forces that can adapt to technological challenges beyond our normal specifications. The morning sun climbed higher, burning away the last traces of smoke from distant fires. Across the Mediterranean, cargo ships carried legitimate trade between nations that were slowly learning to cooperate rather than compete. In research laboratories, scientists worked to develop technologies that would improve human life rather than more efficient methods of ending it. And in military bases worldwide, pilots prepared for training exercises that might someday save civilization from those who would use advanced weapons to enslave rather than protect. The future remained unwritten, shaped by choices that had yet to be made by people who were still learning what it meant to possess technologies that could either elevate humanity or destroy it entirely. The memorial service was held at sunset, when the Syrian sky transformed into a canvas of amber and gold that seemed to honor fallen warriors across all cultures and centuries. The entire personnel of Callsign Air Base assembled on the main runway, their dress uniforms creating precise formations that spoke to military discipline, maintained even in moments of profound grief. General Marchenko had flown in from Moscow specifically to preside over ceremonies honoring a pilot whose sacrifice had prevented catastrophe on a scale that most would never comprehend. An empty chair sat at the center of the formation, draped with the Russian flag and surrounded by flowers that had been flown in from Damascus. Beside it stood a display case containing the personal effects recovered from Yelena's quarters, flight logs that documented missions to places that didn't appear on any official map, photographs of squadron mates from training exercises that seemed to belong to another era, and a letter addressed to her parents that would never be delivered because revealing her true fate would compromise operations that remained classified at the highest levels. Captain Yelena Vasquez, General Marchenko's voice carried across the assembled formation with the authority of someone who'd presided over too many similar ceremonies, died in service to principles that transcend national boundaries or political affiliations. She gave her life to ensure that advanced technology serves humanity's greater interests rather than those who would use it to profit from suffering and conflict. The words seemed inadequate to capture the complexity of a woman who'd spent 18 months living multiple identities, while gathering intelligence that had prevented shadow organizations from achieving technological dominance over legitimate military forces. Yet they served their purpose, providing closure for people who needed to understand that her sacrifice had meaning beyond the immediate tactical situation. Major Petrov stepped forward to deliver the pilot's eulogy, his voice steady despite emotions that threatened to overwhelm professional composure. Yelena was more than an exceptional pilot. She was someone who understood that flying isn't about conquering the sky, but about dancing with forces that are greater than any individual. Last night, she danced one final time, and her performance saved lives that will never know her name. As the ceremony concluded with the traditional flyover, 11 Su-57 fighters in missing man formation, maintenance crews were already preparing aircraft for missions that would continue the work Yelena had begun. Intelligence packages were being analyzed to identify other shadow facilities. Tactical procedures were being developed to engage enemies equipped with advanced technology, and pilots were training for scenarios that would test human adaptability against artificial intelligence designed to eliminate conventional military forces. The sun touched the horizon, painting the assembled formation in light that seemed to come from beyond the visible spectrum. For a moment, everyone present felt connected to something larger than their individual concerns, a shared understanding that civilization depended on people willing to sacrifice everything to preserve principles that couldn't be measured in terms of technological advancement or economic advantage. As darkness fell across the Syrian desert, the stars appeared with unusual brilliance, their ancient light bearing witness to another chapter in humanity's ongoing struggle to ensure that advanced knowledge served wisdom rather than ambition. Somewhere among those stars, the spirit of a pilot who died twice for causes greater than herself continued flying eternal patrol, watching over a world that was slowly learning to distinguish between progress and mere technological accumulation. The memorial flame that burned beside the empty chair would be maintained until the last of her squadron mates had joined her in whatever realm awaited warriors who'd given everything in service to others. Until then, her callsign would remain active in radio protocols, a reminder that some voices transcended physical existence to become part of the permanent record of human courage under impossible circumstances. 3 months later, intelligence reports confirmed the destruction of 4 additional shadow manufacturing facilities across 3 continents. Each had been eliminated by conventional military forces using tactics developed from lessons learned during the Syrian operation. The technologies that had once seemed invincible had been defeated not through superior equipment, but through human adaptability that no artificial intelligence could completely predict or counter. Colonel Kozlov had been promoted to general and assigned to lead a multinational task force dedicated to identifying and neutralizing shadow organizations that sought to weaponize advanced technology for private gain. His first official act was establishing the Vasquez Protocol, rules of engagement, designed to ensure that conventional forces could effectively confront enemies equipped with exotic weapons systems. The protocol emphasized improvisation over standardization, human creativity over technological superiority, and tactical flexibility that could adapt to challenges that had never been anticipated during normal training exercises. It required pilots to think beyond conventional doctrine while maintaining the discipline necessary for coordinated military operations. Major Petrov commanded the task force's air component, leading pilots from multiple nations who'd volunteered for missions that couldn't be fully explained in official briefings. They flew aircraft that had been modified with systems reverse-engineered from debris recovered at various shadow facilities, creating hybrid fighters that combined conventional reliability with limited exotic capabilities. The work was dangerous, often deadly, and always classified at levels that prevented families from knowing the true nature of missions their loved ones flew. Yet volunteers continued stepping forward, drawn by the understanding that civilization's future depended on preventing advanced technology from being controlled by people who valued profit over human welfare. In Moscow, Yelena's parents received medals honoring their daughter's sacrifice without ever learning the true circumstances of her death. The official story remained that she died in a training accident, a fiction necessary to protect ongoing operations against enemies who thrived in shadows and secrecy. They would never know that their daughter had become a legend among pilots worldwide, her call sign synonymous with courage that transcended rational calculation. The technological arms race continued, but its trajectory had been altered by the actions of people who understood that advanced weapons meant nothing without the wisdom to use them responsibly. Shadow organizations still existed, still sought to profit from conflict, but they operated in a world where conventional forces had proven capable of adapting to challenges that exceeded normal specifications. Research laboratories in legitimate governments began developing their own exotic technologies, but under oversight designed to ensure that new capabilities served defensive rather than aggressive purposes. International treaties were negotiated to prevent the proliferation of weapons that could destabilize entire regions, while intelligence services cooperated to identify emerging threats before they could achieve operational capability. The future remained uncertain, shaped by choices that had yet to be made by people who were still learning what it meant to possess technologies that could either elevate humanity or destroy it entirely. But thanks to the sacrifice of a pilot who died twice for principles greater than herself, that future would be decided by legitimate governments rather than shadow organizations that recognized no authority beyond their own ambition. High above the earth, commercial aircraft carried passengers between destinations they could reach safely, because warriors they would never know had fought battles they could never imagine. The sky remained infinite, its blue expanse unmarred by the scars of conflicts that had been prevented through courage that transcended technological limitations. 1 year after the Syrian operation, General Kozlov stood in his new office at NATO headquarters in Brussels, studying intelligence reports that painted an increasingly optimistic picture of global security. The shadow organizations that had once seemed unstoppable had been systematically dismantled through international cooperation that transcended traditional political boundaries. Nations that had been enemies found common cause in confronting threats that recognized no sovereignty beyond technological superiority. The Vasquez Protocol had been adopted by air forces worldwide, its emphasis on adaptive tactics proving effective against enemies who relied on artificial intelligence to predict and counter conventional approaches. Training programs had been revolutionized to emphasize creativity over standardization, producing pilots who could think beyond established doctrine while maintaining the discipline necessary for coordinated military operations. "Sir," his aide announced, "the Memorial Committee has reached a decision regarding the proposed monument. They've selected a design that incorporates elements from Captain Vasquez's aircraft, along with traditional symbols of sacrifice and service." The monument would be erected at the location where she'd made her final landing at Callsign Air Base, its titanium and exotic materials arranged in patterns that suggested wings ascending toward infinite sky. Pilots from around the world had contributed to its funding, recognizing that her sacrifice had prevented a future where advanced technology served only those wealthy enough to purchase it from shadow organizations. Through his office window, Kozlov could see transport aircraft from multiple nations preparing for joint training exercises that would have been impossible before the Syrian operation. Former adversaries now shared intelligence, coordinated defensive strategies, and worked together to ensure that exotic technologies were developed under oversight that prioritized human welfare over profit margins. The technological revolution continued, but its direction had been fundamentally altered by the actions of people who understood that advanced capabilities meant nothing without the wisdom to use them responsibly. Artificial intelligence served human decision-makers rather than replacing them. Directed energy weapons were developed for defensive purposes rather than aggressive ones. And exotic propulsion systems opened space exploration opportunities that benefited all humanity rather than enabling private militaries to dominate terrestrial conflicts. In flight schools across the globe, instructors taught new generations of pilots about the importance of maintaining human elements in increasingly automated warfare. They emphasized that no technology could completely eliminate the need for courage, adaptability, and willingness to sacrifice individual interests for greater purposes. The lesson was always illustrated with the story of a pilot whose callsign had become synonymous with those qualities. "Zephyr," they would say, explaining the origin of tactical doctrines that had reshaped modern aerial combat. She proved that advanced technology is only as effective as the human spirit that guides it. The stars continued wheeling across night skies, unmarred by conflicts that had been prevented through sacrifice that few would ever comprehend. Commercial flights carried passengers safely between destinations, because warriors they would never know had fought battles they could never imagine. Children grew up in a world where advanced technology served civilization rather than threatening it, because someone had been willing to die twice to ensure that future remained possible. In museums around the world, exhibits honored the pilots who'd volunteered for missions that couldn't be fully explained in official records. Their names were inscribed in stone and metal, reminders that freedom depended on people willing to confront challenges that exceeded rational calculation. Among those names, one appeared with increasing frequency, accompanied by a callsign that had become legendary among those who understood the true cost of preserving humanity's future. The wind that blew across Memorial Gardens carried the sound of distant engines, a reminder that somewhere above the clouds, eternal patrol continued by pilots who'd earned their wings through courage that transcended physical existence. 5 years after the Syrian operation, the world had settled into a new equilibrium, where advanced technology served humanity's greater interests, rather than shadow organizations that profited from perpetual conflict. The Vasquez Protocol had evolved into comprehensive international treaties that governed the development and deployment of exotic weapons systems, ensuring that new capabilities were subject to oversight that prioritized defensive applications over aggressive ones. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood before the United Nations Security Council, her presentation summarizing technological developments that would have seemed impossible before conventional military forces had proven capable of adapting to challenges that exceeded their original specifications. As the leading researcher in exotic propulsion systems, she'd spent years studying debris recovered from shadow manufacturing facilities, reverse engineering technologies that had been intended to establish permanent technological dominance over legitimate governments. Ladies and gentlemen, her voice carried the authority of someone who'd helped transform science fiction into operational reality. The technologies we've recovered have opened possibilities that extend far beyond military applications. Exotic propulsion systems are enabling space exploration missions that would have required decades using conventional methods. Directed energy systems are providing clean power generation that could eliminate humanity's dependence on fossil fuels. Advanced materials are revolutionizing construction techniques that will allow us to build cities that exist in harmony with natural environments rather than dominating them. The irony was profound. Technologies developed by shadow organizations to ensure their dominance over global conflicts were instead being used to eliminate the economic conditions that made such conflicts profitable. Clean energy reduced competition for natural resources. Space exploration provided new frontiers that offered unlimited expansion opportunities, and advanced construction techniques enabled sustainable development that could support growing populations without environmental destruction. In flight training academies around the world, new generations of pilots learned to operate aircraft that combined conventional reliability with limited exotic capabilities. They studied tactical doctrines that emphasized adaptation over standardization, human creativity over technological superiority, and international cooperation over national competition. Their instructors invariably emphasized that these innovations had been purchased through sacrifice that deserved permanent remembrance. The memorial at Callsign Air Base had become a pilgrimage destination for pilots who wanted to understand the human cost preventing technological subjugation. The monument's titanium surfaces reflected sunlight in patterns that suggested wings ascending toward infinite possibilities, while its exotic materials provided subtle reminders that advanced technology could serve noble purposes when guided by wisdom that prioritized human welfare over private gain. Colonel Petrov, now commanding the International Exotic Technology Monitoring Agency, maintained his office in a building that overlooked the memorial. Each morning, he began his day by reviewing intelligence reports that painted an increasingly optimistic picture of global technological development. Shadow organizations still existed, but they operated in a world where conventional forces had proven capable of identifying and neutralizing threats before they could achieve operational capability. His work involved coordinating with researchers like Dr. Rodriguez to ensure that new technological developments were subject to oversight that prevented their misuse for aggressive purposes. The process required balancing legitimate security concerns with scientific advancement that could benefit all humanity, a delicate negotiation that demanded both technical expertise and political wisdom. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across his desk as he reviewed proposals for the next generation of monitoring satellites that would use exotic sensor systems to identify unauthorized technological development anywhere on Earth. The irony wasn't lost on him. They were using advanced technology to prevent others from using advanced technology inappropriately, a recursive solution that required constant vigilance to avoid becoming the very threat they sought to prevent. Through his window, transport aircraft from multiple nations prepared for joint training exercises that demonstrated how former adversaries could work together when facing challenges that transcended traditional political boundaries. The sky above them remained infinite, its blue expanse unmarked by conflicts that had been prevented through cooperation, that honored the sacrifice of those who'd given everything to preserve humanity's future. 10 years after the Syrian operation, the transformation was complete. What had begun as a desperate mission to prevent shadow organizations from achieving technological dominance had evolved into a new era of international cooperation that prioritized human welfare over national competition. The technologies that had once threatened to enslave humanity were instead being used to explore new frontiers that offered unlimited possibilities for peaceful expansion and development. Professor Yelena Vasquez, the name had been officially restored to honor her memory, was remembered not as a casualty of classified operations, but as a pioneer who'd helped humanity navigate the transition from an era of technological scarcity to one of exotic abundance. Universities worldwide offered courses in Vasquez ethics, exploring the moral implications of possessing technologies that could either elevate civilization or destroy it entirely. Her parents, now in their 70s, had finally learned the truth about their daughter's sacrifice through a carefully managed disclosure process that honored both their need to know and the ongoing security requirements of operations that continued protecting humanity from those who would misuse advanced capabilities. They took pride in knowing that her name had become synonymous with the principle that technology should serve humanity rather than controlling it. The annual memorial service at Callsign Air Base drew pilots from around the world, their different uniforms representing nations that had learned to work together when facing challenges that exceeded any single country's ability to address independently. The ceremony always concluded with a flyover featuring aircraft that incorporated exotic technologies developed under international oversight that ensured new capabilities served defensive rather than aggressive purposes. As the sun set across the Syrian desert, painting the memorial in light that seemed to come from beyond the visible spectrum, thousands of people gathered to honor someone who died twice to ensure that humanity's future would be decided by legitimate governments rather than shadow organizations that recognized no authority beyond their own ambition. The stars appeared with unusual brilliance as darkness fell, their ancient light bearing witness to another chapter in humanity's ongoing evolution toward wisdom that could match its technological capabilities. Somewhere among those stars, commercial spacecraft carried passengers between orbital facilities that existed because someone had been willing to sacrifice everything to prevent advanced technology from being controlled by people who valued profit over human welfare. The wind that blew across the memorial carried the sound of distant engines, some conventional, some exotic, all operated by pilots who understood that their ability to fly freely through infinite sky had been preserved through courage that transcended rational calculation. Their children would inherit a universe where advanced technology served exploration rather than exploitation, because warriors they would never know had fought battles they could never imagine to ensure that future remained possible. In the growing darkness, the memorial flame continued burning, maintained by an international consortium that had pledged to keep it lit until the last person who remembered the true cost of technological freedom had joined those they honored in whatever realm awaited people who'd given everything in service to others. The future stretched ahead like an infinite runway, its possibilities limited only by humanity's wisdom in choosing destinations that served its highest aspiration rather than its basest fears. Thanks to the sacrifice of a pilot who'd understood that some prices were worth paying for the chance to prevent greater suffering, that future would be navigated by people who'd learned to distinguish between progress and mere technological accumulation. High above the earth, Eternal patrol continued by pilots who'd earned their wings through courage that transcended physical existence, watching over a world that was slowly learning to use its gifts responsibly. The sky remained infinite, its blue expanse unmarked by the scars of conflicts that had been prevented through sacrifice that would be remembered as long as humans continued reaching toward the stars with dreams that exceeded their limitations. The legend lived on, whispered between pilots who understood that freedom required constant vigilance and occasional sacrifice, but ultimately depended on people willing to ensure that advanced technology served humanity's greater interests, rather than those who would use it to profit from suffering and conflict. In the end, that was enough to preserve hope for tomorrows that remained unwritten, shaped by choices that honored the memory of those who'd given everything to ensure that humanity's future would be decided by wisdom rather than mere technological superiority.